Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've decided to answer a specific question that is rather important to the topic of video game history. Specifically, what exactly made Halo Combat Evolved great? Released way back in 2001, and having such a profound impact on the video game industry that it helped determine where first-person shooters would go for the next decade or so, along with helping to ensure the success of the original Xbox, it is quite safe to say that there are very few games that have had this sort of impact on the history of gaming as the Halo franchise. But to be honest, I would have to argue that these accomplishments would only be possible if the game were already great to begin with. So instead of utilizing the context of the current era, we should instead analyze the game's features as they stood out in 2001 when it first came out. And with that in mind, I would have to say that one of the first things that truly made Halo great was the fact that at its core it was an FPS that was designed to effectively handle everything from close quarters interior on-foot fighting to utilizing vehicles and much more larger open maps as well, with even transitions in between these segments in the same level. So allow me to explain why this was such a big deal back in 2001. While there were larger scale FPS games that handled both on-foot and vehicle sections quite well in their own right, at least on PC, with titles such as the Tribes franchise, the original Operation Flashpoint, World War II Online, and Codename Eagle all being good examples, it should also be noted that these games tended to struggle when it came to designing good quality close quarters maps. So the fact that Halo Combat Evolved was capable of pulling off those kinds of maps as well, and even doing it on console, made it, from both a technical and design standpoint, nothing short of impressive. And these design decisions did not only improve the game's campaign, but also positively impacted the multiplayer as well, as Halo Combat Evolved offered players more variety in types of maps that they could play on, with maps such as Battle Creek and Blood Gulch both being among the most famous and iconic Halo 1 maps to this very day that at the same time offer very different gameplay from one another. Another thing that made Halo Combat Evolved stand out in 2001, although thanks to Halo Combat Evolved it is now fairly common within FPS games, were the changes to gameplay mechanics that set it apart from previous FPS titles, namely the 2-weapon limit as well as regenerating shields. The 2-weapon limit itself meant that the game required a certain extra layer of strategy in comparison to most FPS games of the era, as players now couldn't simply carry every single weapon in the game. Again, Halo Combat Evolved is not the first FPS to ever do this, as one could just as quickly point to examples of tactical shooters from this time period. However, those tended to be a little bit more niche in terms of genre, with the game design of a tactical shooter meant to be a little bit slower paced and more methodical. By contrast, the pace of Halo Combat Evolved is notably more brisk, and thus, in terms of gameplay, was closer to the arena shooters and run-and-gun games of the era, which also explains the far more forgiving damage model in comparison to a tactical shooter, as exemplified by the recharging shields. But going back to the 2-weapon limit, another benefit of this that should be brought up is the fact that it allowed Halo Combat Evolved to have a significantly larger arsenal, without the problem of potentially overburdening the player's inventory, meaning that a player wouldn't be expected to switch through dozens of different weapons in their inventory, something that would become a major problem with the limitations of a console controller from that era. So given the context, it's not difficult to see why Halo took off as a franchise, and why its ideas have been so often copied by other franchises, as both regenerating health and the 2-weapon limit became staples of the FPS genre for well over a decade, and have only relatively recently had their stranglehold on the genre slightly loosened. Now, for those of you who wish to experience this piece of video game history, I would say that your best bet would be to pick it up as part of the Halo Master Chief Collection, which is available both digitally for Steam as well as the Xbox One. But regardless, this has been Ace, and I hope you will all agree with me when I say that Halo Combat Evolved is great.